I had a glitch with my paper punch. Like the middle part came really loose and like was falling out. So I'm sorry. You'll have to punch your own third hole.
Do you have a thing? It's good.
So I apologize if you're keeping them all in a binder. You only have 2 holes tonight. Welcome to those who are joining us online. Sorry we're off to a late start. If you're trying to join us live, we've been chatting about Life of Grace here. We're in lesson 3 of I Apologize. Last week, we took a look at how do we know that Jesus really rose from the dead? And a lot of our defense, a lot of the proofs that we had came straight out of the Gospels, right? We looked at a lot of verses. I kind of have to apologize for tonight's Bible class because we're not going to do a whole lot of Bible tonight. The question tonight is, since we took all those proof passages from the New Testament, can we really trust the New Testament? So we're going to do some apologetics looking at how do we know the New Testament is really real? How do we know it's true? How do we know it's authentic? How do we know that it hasn't been passed on through so many generations that it's just become legend and myth? How do we know that the disciples didn't make the story up? That's going to be kind of the topic of conversation for the next 2 weeks. Before we begin, I know it's cheesy, but we're going to play the telephone game. You guys know the telephone game? So the telephone game, I'm going to take Diane out into the hallway, and I'm going to whisper to her a secret message that I've written down on this piece of paper. I should cover it so the people at home can't see through. It's a long section. It is 3 sentences. 3 sentences long. Okay, maybe I'll start with Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start with Ryan. I'm going to whisper to Ryan 3 sentences. Get the, as best you can, get the gist of it. If it's not word for word, that's okay. Ryan will then, I'll come back in the room and I'll send Phil out. And Ryan will tell Phil. When Ryan gets back, he'll send Heidi out. Get it?
Yep.
We'll go through it and see how close we get by the time we get to the end. All right, come on, Ryan.
So should I just completely change it?
Yes.
Out of the spirit. Me either. Me too. Yeah.
Who's teaching in the afternoons?
Kelly.
Oh.
We lost already. Coaches even talking.
You repeat that.
That'd be
That's why I
like
don't
3 words.
Because I would remember it.
Okay, Phil, go. Share it.
That's a longer conversation.
I read it to him twice just to make sure that the original message got through.
I see.
No, don't read it. Can you read it from there? Okay. All right. This is for the people at home. Can you see it
I'm
there?
like, what are you doing?
I'm letting the people at home read it.
Hold up 2 fingers. No, that's 4.
Let me get my glasses on. I can read.
No way.
No? I don't know how well he's going to do. It's 3 sentences. That's it.
That's a lot of sentences.
Yeah, it
That's
is.
way
Way too many.
over my head.
It's true.
You want it hard
After all
enough for us to
these
be
zombies on the left side.
Right. If I just do a 1 sentence at the
You
end,
do
doesn't
rubber
work.
baby buggy bumpers and everybody just knows.
Rubber what? Rubber what? What? No, I'm just kidding. That's hard enough as is.
She sells seashells, nobody seashells.
How about we'll go Ryan through Harold, and then we'll quit there, just for time's sake.
Okay.
Is that all right?
That's a good idea.
All right.
Good idea.
Hey, what's taking so long, you guys?
Yeah, don't memorize it.
All right. Heidi, you ready?
I'm so excited.
All right, hands up. Here comes Heidi. Ryan, get back in there.
Good luck.
Okay, so were you serious?
Is it complicated?
Were you Bill serious?
Were you trying to mess it up,
I
or
was not.
no?
I was not trying
Okay.
to mess it up.
Good on you.
Okay, maybe we'll just go through Marion. Just because how long it's taking. This is meant to be a quick exercise. And
Well,
He'd kill
I
appetite.
told him once. He looks at me and goes, "What?"
So he said it all over again.
I'm like, okay. This I tend to get. He's like, what? Like, so then I just paraphrase this, and this is what you need to know. This, and this, and this. And
Are you ready?
How'd you do?
Got the high. Oh, that was fast.
1812, Massachusetts, rigging of the Republican vote.
Wait, say again?
1812, Massachusetts, rigging of the Republican vote.
Okay. Massachusetts, 1812, rigging of the Republican vote.
Yes.
Here's the original message I read to Ryan. Ready? In 1812, Elbridge Gerry, the governor of Massachusetts, rearranged the districts to give the Republicans an advantage over the Federalists. One district ended up looking like a salamander. Today, whenever governors redistrict to get an unfair advantage in the election booths, it's called gerrymandering, after the salamander that Elbridge Gerry made. Gerrymandering. What is it? An explanation of gerrymandering. That's true, by the way. It looked all weird, it was all twisted around, and gerrymandering. And you've probably heard the term before, gerrymandering. Well, there's the background behind it. So we went from that explanation to 1812, Massachusetts, rigging of Republican votes.
Not too bad.
Got the gist of it. What is the point? Why am I doing all this? If it's verbally passed on from generation to generation, and that's the accusation that so many critics of the Bible levy against the Bible. They say there's no way you can trust it. It wasn't written down until decades, if not a century after the events. In fact, until probably 50 years ago, maybe even less than that, that was the thought, is the Bible wasn't first written down in the New Testament until about 130 to 160 AD.
For a lot of the writers in Jesus, they referred physically, they referred back to their writings from the Old Testament.
Yeah, they refer to the Old Testament. Yeah,
Referred back to the Old Testament.
but the accusation is really levied against the New Testament, that it's been written so long after Jesus' life. We can't really know what Jesus really said, what he really did. It's not really accurate. All right, we're not going to do it tonight, but if I were to start at the other end and I were to give this piece of paper to Diane and say, Diane, use this piece of scrap paper to copy it. Write it out. You'd be more comfortable doing that. Yeah, and then I want you to take your copy. You can shred the original even. Take your copy and give it to Larry. And Larry's going to use his scrap paper and he's going to write it down word for word. And he'll shred what you gave him and pass it on to Mark. What do you think the result would be the second time around?
More accurate.
Yeah, in fact, probably pretty close to
In
perfect.
fact, if you knew that you were supposed to do that, you'd have
Yeah, you probably
What
have.
the scribe supposedly did.
Exactly.
They made a mistake, you started.
Yeah, and they made them. They would literally count the number of letters on a page, and if the number of letters did not match what the original did, they'd shred your copy, your whole copy. And when they got done to it with a whole chapter, they'd count the number of words, and if you were not right, your whole, like that whole month and a half worth of work, would be for nothing. They'd shred it, burn it. Is what they do. They're shredders. Yeah. Sorry, we would have had to use both sides. All right, so. But you get the point. So we're going to talk about it tonight. And I'm going to go kind of quickly just because I only have half an hour now. But can the New Testament really be trusted? Was it done by telephone? Was it done by copying? Did the copyists make mistakes? How do we know that what we have is really what the apostles wrote? And then next week we're going to take a look, did the apostles really tell the truth, and how do we know? Maybe that's a myth and legend that they decided to write down. So, all right. So we just kind of went through all three. Intro. God has preserved his word for us remarkably well. I think we have no need to fear that the message the apostles wrote is vastly different than what we have in our Bibles today. So tonight we're going to take a look at some of that evidence. 3-1. Last week we defended Jesus' resurrection based on the New Testament and just very few Old Testament prophecies. How do we know the New Testament is actually trustworthy? That should probably be one word, shouldn't it? Should have someone be my official scribe to mark my typos so I can correct this if I'm going to use it again. But aren't all the manuscripts lost now? In fact, you know how many of the original manuscripts we have? 0. We do not have what Mark literally wrote down. We do not have what John literally wrote down. We don't have any of them. We have none of the manuscripts that in their originals. Not a single one. Does that worry you? Hopefully, by the end of this lesson, you won't be worried. If you are, if they're of any cause of concern, we'll take a look. So that's what we're going to look at the next 2 weeks. First of all, history is completely and totally on our side. AD 66. The Jews decided they were going to start a revolt. They were sick and tired of paying these Roman taxes. They were hoping that the Messiah, when he came, would throw off the Roman yoke and the Roman burden, that they would become a national entity again of power and authority and no longer be under Roman control. The Romans didn't really care for that, to put it mildly, right? How did Romans view traitors? If you were to betray the Roman government, if you were to rebel and revolt against them, yeah, destroy that nation. Or at the very least, you maim and kill enough of them so that they are put in their place. And the typical way was a crucifixion, right? There's accounts of dozens, if not hundreds, of people crucified along the roads. This was nothing new. It wasn't like they do 3 a year. No, they did mass crucifixions. To make, yeah, exactly. To make sure that people knew that they were under the Roman thumb. Put them in their place. You pay your tribute, you pay your taxes, we're going to get along just fine. You revolt, you rebel, well, then we have a massive Roman army, who quite frankly, at this point in history, is kind of getting restless because they don't have much left to conquer. So we'll send them, and they'll take care of you. And you know the story. In 70 AD, the son of Vespasian, maybe you don't know the story. If you don't, brush up on it sometime. Wikipedia will give you the gist. Vespasian was the emperor at the time. He had a son named Titus, not to be confused with Paul's vicar, Titus. And Titus went and he marched against Jerusalem and he surrounded them. I mean, it's really the first Holocaust. It was horrible. Women and children being mercilessly slaughtered. They were hiding literally in the sewers in order to avoid getting murdered. If they escaped from the city, they were trying to find places in the wilderness, caves they could hide in. And finally, there's a place, if you guys heard of Masada? Masada is this big, first of all, the sewers, here's the wall of Jerusalem Temple Mount. And there's this place that comes off of it called Robinson's Arch. Comes up like this, you guys heard of that? It's the arch has fallen since, and it's just kind of this thing sticking out of the side of the day to get up. There's the steps that went up there. Along this route, they're smarter than the French. Most scholars think the French invented the sewer system. They didn't. The Jews had a sewer system long before. It was this big trench, and what they did is they laid giant stone tiles across this trench. They found that this part of the Temple Mount had fallen through some of these big cracks and then shattered these tiles. That's all in archaeology they did in 1967 after the 6 Days War. And it's pretty cool because they pulled apart the temple at the time in 70 AD in order to get at all the gold that had melted and fallen through the cracks. So, but it's in these sewers that the kids would hide. You get someone to lift up a stone and they'd come crawl into it and they hide in there so they can crawl out. Eventually, when the city fell, the temple was burned. A lot of people ask me, how did the temple burn? Is it made of stone? Yes, but it's stone on the walls, and then they put plats of wood across like this, right? And then they put stuff on top, and then they overlay the whole thing with gold. So all this burns, the gold melts down and comes apart. The Jews fled to a place called Masada, and it's a big plateau. Mesa, if you're in the southwest, right? And they went and they said, we're going to hide up here in a big fortress up top here in Masada. What did the Romans do? Is that going to stop the Romans? No. First of all, they just camp their troops in tents all the way around it. So if anyone ever tries to come down, we'll just slaughter them, right? What's their problem up here? No food, and no water. And that's not enough for the Romans. The Romans, go big or go home. They build giant siege works and they start filling this up and loading dirt so that they can build a giant ramp. The Jews know what's going to go on, what's going to happen when the Romans get to the top. They won't just get killed. What will happen to them first? Tortured, crucified. So what do they decide to do? It's a really sad story. It really is the first Holocaust. They draw straws. Eldest in the family murders everyone in his family. They draw straws of the survivors. The survivors, one who gets the short straw has to kill everybody else, and then they take their own lives in the end. There's one guy who didn't quite have the stomach for suicide. And he said, I give. Romans, please don't kill me. I'll do whatever you want. I'll tell you what you want. I'll help you destroy the Jews, even though he's a Jew. He's Benedict Arnold. You guys know his name? Flavius Josephus.
The historian?
And he becomes the Jewish historian of historians. He actually then, from some chance, or I think by God's grace, even though he's not a Christian, becomes friends with Vespasian himself. Titus, his son, is the general that's conquering and captures him, but he goes back to Rome, becomes friends with Vespasian, and becomes a historian. So Flavius Josephus and this whole thing is the coward Benedict Arnold. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and that right there is a miracle that they spared him, because I mean the Romans did all this work.
Right.
There's only one dude alive. You can guarantee what they want to do to that guy.
Yeah. And they spare him anyway.
It's,
And to me, it's one of these big miracles of how God is using the people of the different nations in the world as his pawns. Because Josephus is not a Christian. He mocks it. But he writes history. I've never read it. I've got it in an audiobook. I made it through like about 6 hours of it. And it's just so long and dry because it's all these names I don't know. I'm trying. I'm going to keep trying. I'm trying to finish Josephus's works one of these years. Here's just one short excerpt.
I
Go ahead.
see that in your list of books to read that was in there. Is that a kind of a good copy of what he wrote then?
The works of Josephus is what we've got handed down to us, copies of what Josephus wrote in his histories. Yeah. And almost all scholars admit this is accurate to what Josephus wrote. This is his perspective. And especially because he's not a Christian, he has no Christian bias. But what he does is he verifies some of the history that we have of the New Testament. Because what's the challenge is that, sure, converts to Christianity wrote your Christian Bible. They're non-biased. Of course they're going to slant things to make it look good for them. Well, Josephus is not. The Talmud, do you guys know what the Talmud is?
First books were written in 5.
That's the Pentateuch,
Oh, yeah.
Some holy Jewish.
Torah.
position.
The Talmud is Jewish commentaries on history and on the Old Testament, but on history too. The Talmud, in it, admits there was this man named Jesus who did all kinds of witchcraft, magic, and sorcery through the power of the devil. I think if you, great short apologetic, by the way, is The Week That Changed the World, that 30-minute video. Does a really good job of very short, punchy, and it mentions that in there. It says what's, Professor Meyer says, what's the difference between a miracle and magic and witchcraft? Both are supernatural events that we have no explanation for. One gives credit to demons and Satan, one gives credit to God. In essence, the Talmud is saying, we admit there's no explanation for the things Jesus did. Here's Josephus on page 16. There was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. This is a non-Christian. This is what he's just reporting history, right? Many people became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but his disciples reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Josephus is not the only one. He's just one of the most blatant ones. There's all kinds of secular histories, not in the New Testament, not in our Bible, outside sources from non-converts, non-Christians who say these things. I'm just going to give you these 12 bullet points. I stole these, by the way, from I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. These are not original to me, but they're true. 1, Jesus lived during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. That's pretty much well agreed. 2, Jesus lived a virtuous life. He was a good guy. Everyone thought he was a good guy. In fact, even in the crucifixion accounts, what do his enemies say as they're taunting him?
Somebody said he was Beelzebub.
Okay, but when he's literally on the cross, they said he saved others. Why doesn't he save himself? What do they admit? He was a good guy, right? He helped other people out his whole life. Even the people who were chanting for his death say he saved others, right? Kind of ironic, isn't it? They admit his innocence as they're taunting him. Jesus was a wonder maker. Talmud says he worked magic with the power of demons, but he did miracles or at least amazing tricks. We don't know how he did it. 4, he had a brother named James. 5, he was claimed to be the Messiah. 6, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. 7, that was on the eve of the Jewish Passover. 8, darkness and an earthquake occurred when he died. There are extra biblical sources that highlight this. There is the great earthquake that took place in whatever year, AD, 30-something, right? I thought it was kind of neat when we watched the video this year. It just happened to line up that this year, Easter happened to be on the day that Professor Paul Meyer said Easter happened on this day. Isn't that kind of neat? Did you guys notice that? Okay, check it out sometime. Jesus' disciples believed he died and rose from the dead. That is well attested to, not just Josephus. Christianity spread rapidly as far as Rome within a few decades. There is absolutely zero doubt on that. There's just that it spread across the then known globe pretty much. 12, Jesus' disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped Jesus as God, even in Rome, and that's why they were tortured and killed for it. All of that is just, it's history. There's no question. You ask the most liberal atheist scholar, and he will agree to those 12 points. Clearly, it's unreasonable to hold to the theory that the man Jesus never existed. The real question is, what does it say about the New Testament? What does that do for us in our faith and in the New Testament?
Well, most of what is in the New Testament is backed up by other sources that are not a religious background.
All the secular sources support and uphold the New Testament. I didn't even get into archaeology in this. But we could totally get into archaeology, which has made people change their minds in the last 40 years about some of this stuff. You've heard of Lee Strobel, right? An investigative reporter who tried to disprove the gospel by doing his research as an investigative journalist, and he found out the evidence is overwhelming. You guys know who Anne Rice is? It's like to read it all. Yeah? What's her most famous book? Turned into a movie with Tom Cruise? No? Interview with a Vampire. You guys heard of her?
Yeah, not that.
She was a Catholic. She was burned as a Catholic, wanted nothing to do with religion, married an atheist, totally wrote off God, wrote about, I would call it romantic vampirism. I don't know what the genre is, right? It's sappy love stories with a vampire that lives thousands of years. There's the Vampire Lestat, and a bunch of books that came after. What you maybe didn't know is she sat down to try and disprove Christianity. What she found out is the evidence is completely overwhelming from history. And she regained her Christianity, went back to her roots, and started writing the very opposite of romantic vampire novels, started writing about Christ. I've never read any. I've read her vampire ones. I've never read any of her Christian ones. I should. It's also on my to-read list once I get through all of Flavius Josephus. All of history supports the claims the New Testament makes. That should be definitely a strengthening force. But how accurate is the New Testament as a historical document? That's what we're going to try and answer tonight. If you study ancient manuscripts, you have way more evidence to trust the New Testament than you do in any other ancient manuscript. And the evidence is just totally and completely overwhelming. And if you have just a tiny portion of this in your back pocket, when someone throws out the accusation the Bible was passed on like a game of telephone so you can't trust it, it doesn't fly. There's zero scholarship behind that theory. So let's take a look. I know 16 minutes, so I'm going to try and get through quickly. And I'm just going to explain these charts. These charts aren't great. I'm sorry. I ran out a little bit of time today. So instead of cool, fun graphics, you just get lines and dashes. All right. We have nearly 5,700 handwritten copies of the New Testament. 5,700 by hand. That's going to become even more phenomenal in a minute when I explain some of the history of it. But obviously we have way more copies today because it's been the printing press, right? Barnes & Noble and Amazon probably have millions of copies of the Bible. just sitting in their warehouses. But these are 5,700 copies that are within a 100-year span, all written out by hand, word for word, with remarkable accuracy when compared to each other.
Where are those? In some,
All over. Some are in the museum at London. Some are on tour with the Dead Sea Scrolls. I got to see some of them. When the Dead Sea Scrolls came to Raleigh, North Carolina, we took a church field trip after church one Sunday, and we saw maybe 30 of them. Some of them are the complete New Testament. Some of them are part of one book. Some of them are a couple of chapters, right? A lot of them are complete. When you take all these sections and you look at them, 5,700 copies, all within 100 years, most of them within, I would say, 40 years of the original authorship. That alone should be incredible, shouldn't it? That they're right out by hand, 5,700 copies. Now, just to put that into a little bit of perspective, look at the chart below. Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, right? Odysseus is wandering around trying to get back home after one of the gods is angry and blows his ship off course, right? You know the story. We have 643 copies handwritten. Demosthenes, I don't even know who that dude is. Herodotus writes some histories. Plato, his philosophies, 7 copies. Tacitus, a historian. Caesar, the great Gallic Wars of Caesar, right? What he's writing of his campaign. Incredibly famous guy, right? We have 10 extant copies of what he wrote in ancient manuscript. That's it. We lay out all 10 and we compare them and we go, let's see how close they are to each other. Do we have accurate copies of what he actually wrote? And every scholar of ancient manuscript says, yes, now we know definitively what Caesar wrote, based on 10 copies, compared to 5,700. Pliny, the elder church
Do
historian.
these numbers include like the Dead Sea Scrolls we just found recently?
I believe the Dead Sea Scrolls is huge to this, yeah. I believe the Dead Sea Scrolls does include these. I'm not positive on those numbers.
Because the Dead Sea Scrolls didn't have all the book, I mean, like a book didn't have the whole thing.
Right.
I found parts.
Yeah, and let me be clear, these 5,700, a lot of them are what are called fragments. It's incomplete books, yeah. Dead Sea Scrolls, that tour to me was fascinating, by the way. Just some of the stuff that they're doing now that they couldn't do back then, back in the 50s, 60s when they discovered them. They used cellophane tape to piece the manuscripts together. They didn't know any better about preserving manuscripts. Of course, the cellophane tape, since you know what happens, I've got books that my grandma taped together, and the tape is peeling off because the adhesive is gone, and the ink comes off with it. So they kind of destroyed a bunch of them. But now they're able to piece some of these back together. Now what they're doing, and this is, they've got to go through all kinds of hoops to do it, but they're doing DNA testing on the manuscripts. What? How do you do DNA testing on a manuscript? You know how DNA testing works? You look at the DNA strand. Because they're not made from just trees, they're made from animals. A lot of them were written on what's called vellum, which is animal skin stretched and scraped, so it becomes like thin leather. So the book lasts a whole lot longer than just writing on papyrus or paper. So written on the vellum. Why is that important at all to this discussion? It's not really. You don't have to worry about it. But what's fascinating to me is they do the DNA testing on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then they do DNA testing on the bones that are found at the Dead Sea site. Why are they doing that? They want to know, were these copies that were made at the Dead Sea, or were these copies that when 70 AD and Titus is coming, they grabbed all their important scrolls and fled over into the Dead Sea caves? And they're finding out they've got some of both. Some are the copies that were carried with there, they think, and others are, they clearly made them here, because here's the bones of the goat, and here's the goat's skin, and the thing, the DNA perfectly matches. To me, that's interesting, fascinating stuff that we couldn't have done 10 years ago. So we're learning all this cool stuff about the Dead Sea Scrolls. All these theories that people have are starting to come to light.
There's a show on public TV 7.1 called Roots, and this Negro guy is having 3 people at a time come back, and they're tracing these people's past back into some of the 4th grandparents. Some of the only things they've got is this DNA of the things they're finding out this 5-year-old boy was, because the original census was back in the 1880s or 17 something. they didn't write down the names of the slaves, just their ages and their male or female. And they would go back and they were doing this.
This sort of
what you're
testing.
talking about, Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're figuring out what part of the country they were from, because the different locations in the states at that time.
Match up. Yeah.
And their paper was made by different stuff, so we could tell
Where it came from. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? So interesting stuff. All right, page 17. Not only do we have more manuscripts, 5,700 compared to 643 of Homer, but check this out. Compare the time gap between originals to the copies that we have. Now I really got to go fast. 10 minutes. The New Testament, of these 5,700 copies, most of them are 25 to, I'd say, 45 years. Originals written, 45 years later, we have 5,700 copies. Talk about hitting the bestseller list, right? Of Homer wrote it, are 643 copies. The earliest one we have is 500 years after the original was written. And ancient manuscript scholars go 643 copies, all in pretty much solid agreements, even though it's 500 years after. Yeah, we've got the accurate stuff. Get to Demosthenes, 1,400 years, Herodotus, Plato, 1,200, Tacitus, 1,000, Caesar. We have 10 copies that we date to 1,000 years after Caesar lived. And we go, there's no doubt in our minds what Caesar wrote. Because these 10 copies are all in agreement that are passed down to us 1,000 years later. You see the difference? Pliny, 750. Remember our Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter analogy from last week? What's the picture? What was the point there? I could write a story that says Abraham Lincoln was fill in the blank. And you would have a hard time disproving it or proving it, right? Because we're so far removed now. Why could I not write a book about how 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Centers never really happened? Right. What's the difference between 5,700? It's not really 5,700. I don't know the exact number. It's 5,672 or something like that. It's just shy of 5,700. Within a 25 to 45 year span, that's giant. It's a giant mountain of evidence right there. That we have accurate stuff that's been passed down to us. And a lot of this was rediscovered by the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Do we know, is there any manuscripts or anything written talking against the Bible, against the account of Jesus? Because I'm just thinking like today, like let's say, for example, you were to write about 9/11 and we're making stuff up, there would be stuff written of people opposing what you're saying.
Right.
So you'd think that if there was any doubt, then people would be writing against it too.
Yeah, so no, there is not. That being said, first of all, the accusation is that the Christian church, at 325, Constantine became the emperor and converted to Christianity. It's kind of an important deal for Christianity, changed kind of the world from that point on. He's one of those Martin Luther figures you should know a little bit something about. When Constantine became emperor, there was the suggestion that Constantine went throughout the then known Roman Empire and found all the heresies and all of these books that supposedly did speak against them and burned them up. The big problem with that theory is there is zero shred of evidence that that actually happened. No historian describes him doing that. There is no, I mean, that not one of them survived is pretty crazy.
Well, yeah, 5,700 of the Bible survived, and the same thing was said to that.
Right, which we're going to get to in a second, yeah. So there's no shred of evidence for any outspoken stuff. In fact, I would say the opposite. We do have the Talmud, who's trying to discredit Jesus, says he did witchcraft and magic tricks by the power of the devil. We do have Josephus, who is not at all a Christian, saying, yeah, there's this guy that they claimed he came back to life, and his disciples were preaching this message. So I would say we have the opposite. Huge evidence, huge mountains of evidence in support of the New Testament texts. So what's the significance of 70 AD to the dating of the New Testament? This is maybe what am I thinking now? What happened in 70 AD?
temple was destroyed. The town was destroyed.
Yeah, Jerusalem and the temple is destroyed. Why is that significant to dating the New Testament? Not like you're going to take the New Testament out for dinner. You know what I mean? Putting a date and when was it written. This is an argument from absence. What do you not find in any of the Gospels, in any of Paul's writings, in any of John's writings, that they might want to mention, that a Jew might mention if they knew about it?
It was destroyed.
There is no mention of the destruction of the temple in the New Testament. It took place at 70 AD. How does that support a very early authorship? You get where I'm going with that? If these were written by 100 AD or 130 AD, the way scholars used to think back in the 40s, before the discovery of Dead Sea Scrolls completely blew that theory out of the water, why do they not mention the destruction of the temple? Yeah, this is a massive event for a Jew, right? Yeah, just not that important to us. We're not going to bring it up. No, not likely.
And they were all there when the temple was still full.
Yeah, and they were all there when Jesus predicted the destruction, right? Why not say, aha, see, prediction came true? Because they didn't know about it yet, because it didn't happen yet. Here's the one catch. What about John? Didn't John write in roughly 90 AD after the destruction of the temple? Why doesn't he mention the destruction of the temple then? He didn't know about it. He's in exile, living on an island somewhere where news hadn't reached him yet. I don't know. Or he's so caught up in this weird, crazy psycho vision he's getting. This is what I got to write down. I'm not going to be around much longer. He's maybe in his 90s himself, right? Maybe in his 90s, late 90s. It's time for me to write down what Jesus tells me to write down, not mention the temple right now, or hearsay, especially because I haven't been there and seen it. I'm going to write what I do know. So that's one to keep in your back pocket. Why weren't they written earlier? That's the accusation. Look, you experience something like 9/11. What do? You get a book deal right away. You write your book, and by 2005 at the latest, you've got your book deal and your book out, your memoirs. Why did they wait if Jesus died roughly 30 some AD? Why did they wait till 55, 45 to 65? Most think no later than 70, right? Why did they wait 20 to 40 years before they started writing it?
Could they have been writing and it wasn't published?
Maybe they're writing and it's not yet published. Could be, but does it take 40 years to publish a book?
In that day, maybe.
Maybe.
Well, everything they're doing is word of mouth, and I'm just thinking of a lot of historians and teachers we have. They are teaching, and then it's not until maybe they see the end is near, like, well, I'm not going to be here to tell the story, so I better write it down so somebody can do it. Maybe that's what they're doing.
Yeah,
They're
they're
preaching
busy
until-
preaching.
Yeah.
They're traveling preachers is what they're doing, going from place to place, right? Preaching,
Write it down,
teaching
they
it.
lose a job.
Yeah, and they're going to get the message out now because it's so important. So they're traveling across the globe to share the message. Why else? What else? What would be an anachronism bringing them into our culture to assume that everyone's going to read the book they write? What do you know about that culture? Yeah, how many people could read? Maybe 0.5%. So what would be the point of writing it down? Well, the point of writing it down is we're not going to be around much longer. We want to save this for posterity, right? I mean, Luke even tells us, I did an investigation so that you might know with certainty the things that you've been taught verbally, right? So that you might have a written record of the investigation that's taken place. It's only as their lives are getting close to the end, they go, you know what? We'd better, as eyewitnesses, we have an important job to keep this recorded. But for the most part, it wasn't intended for their generation. It was intended for us. And God said it. So, strongly supported manuscripts. 303 AD. It's not Vespasian anymore. It's Diocletian, who was the emperor. Orders a persecution against Christianity. Technically speaking, that's a series of persecutions. It's not just one. It called for the destruction of churches, the destruction of manuscripts and books, the killing of Christians. Even if he had succeeded in destroying the New Testament. And apparently he missed almost 5,007 copies, which is incredible, right? This is Roman law that you find any Christian writing, it is to be destroyed. A lot of them escaped his notice. He still would not have destroyed the New Testament. Here's why. I don't know if you knew this. I should have had pop quiz, but how many verses in the New Testament? There's 260 chapters, but of verses, there are 7,957 verses. Granted, verses were not something that came until the medieval ages. It wasn't something till after Luther. But just to give you a kind of a percentage of how much, right, there is. Of those 7,957 verses, 7,946 are quoted by the early church fathers. I don't know, probably one or two from Jude. I don't know which 11 aren't, but only 11 verses. Some mathematician figure out percentage there.
And that's derived from their writing?
From their writings.
And who do you mean by church fathers?
Well, just look below it and I'll just give you three examples.
Oh.
Clement of Rome, by 95 AD, had quoted from Matthew, Mark, Luke, Romans, 1 Corinthians, Ephesians, 1 Timothy, Titus, Hebrews, James, and 1 Peter. Ignatius of Smyrna, by 107 AD, so again, roughly 30 years after their writing, had quoted Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, but not 2nd, I don't know why, 1 and 2 Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, all 3 Peters, 1 and 3 John, not 2nd, I don't know why, in Revelation. Polycarp of Smyrna, 110, is pretty similar. He leaves a few out. I had to double up in Ignatius just to get them all to fit on the page. But the number of times they quote it. So think of it this way. Turn the page. If you take all of my sermons in my sermon file, they're all on a blog. So they're all on 2 blogs. I got one blog from all my sermons at Gethsemane and one blog for all the sermons I've preached here at Grace. And I think even from the first one I did. Maybe not. Maybe I started it late in 2010 after I got here. You take all my sermons and you pull out just the Bible passages. And let's make it fair because it's not just me, and let's make it broader. Let's take all of the bulletins I've ever done. And we'll pull all the Bible passages out of there. Okay? Just the Bible passages. We'll cut them out. We'll lay them out on a big table, and we'll try and piece together the Bible based just on my sermons. How much of a Bible do you think we'd have? A lot.
Because you follow the lectionary.
Because I follow the lectionary, and yet there's big chunks of the lectionary. I don't know that I've ever preached on Song of Solomon, ever. Proverbs, I've maybe preached on 3-4 times. There's no way you have 150 Psalms based on my stuff. You maybe have 8 of them, right? I don't know. I don't know how many Psalms I've preached on. I know you only have tiny snippets of Revelation. There's no way you have all Revelation, right? But look at the early church fathers. By 110 AD, all but 11 verses of the New Testament have been copied and quoted. So even if Diocletian had all 5,700 manuscripts and fragments destroyed, it's been quoted enough times that we've got an accurate copy. Do you see how well God preserved the New Testament for us? So the whole, it's been passed on from generation to generation to generation to generation, is really sheer and utter nonsense. It really is. It's something a college kid heard from his college prof one time, latched onto, and thought, oh, therefore I can dismiss what the Bible says to me without actually doing any research. And most likely, it's what some college prof heard from his college prof, latched onto and decided to just regurgitate. But anyone who is worth their academic scholarship today, it's ridiculous to suggest that it's been passed on and we don't have an accurate translation. That being said, one of the most popular professors of theology today, a guy named Bart Eerdmans, definitely not a fan of him. I told you we've gone at it a little bit in the News and Clarion, News and Observer of Raleigh, because he was the professor at University of North Carolina, professor of religion. He has best-selling books called things like The Real Jesus that denies all this stuff. And one of his favorite ploys is to say that, did you know the Bible has more than 200,000 errors in these manuscripts that we've got? That's incredible, isn't it? 200,000 errors that don't match up. When we look at these, we compare these 5,700 manuscripts and we can lay them next to each other. Over 200,000 times they don't match up. That sounds impressive to a college kid, doesn't it? Let me just blow that one out of the water. Let's say we only have 4 manuscripts, and I intentionally stuck 4 manuscript errors in here. Here's my challenge to you. Can you figure out what the original said, even though I intentionally mangled all four? On page 18. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can do all things trough Christ who gives me strength. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. How in the world could we ever figure out what the original says when we have so many errors in our manuscripts? Can you figure it out? I hope so. Yeah? Yeah, you got it, Darryl? Yeah? Okay, good. And that's for intentional errors. When we lay them out, we would say, look, we have 4 errors in this one verse in all 4 manuscripts. How can we ever trust the original? That's how ridiculous his argument is. Oh, did I accidentally delete an argument from here? Yeah, I did. I had one more in here that I accidentally deleted. But what is the difference between this? If I have one manuscript that says, I'm going to abbreviate here, I believe in Christ Jesus. That's our first manuscript. The next one says, I believe in Jesus Christ. What's the difference in meaning?
No.
Nothing whatsoever. And he would say, look, they don't agree. How can you trust them? It's a ridiculous argument, isn't it? And here's the other dumb game that he plays. He will say, if we have 5,400 manuscripts that say Christ Jesus, and we have 300, right? That would be our 5,700 that say Jesus Christ. He doesn't say we have one error copied 300 times. He says we have 300 errors. It's totally a cheating numbers game he's playing. All right, I meant to include this one too, and I'll wrap it up here quickly with this then. But what if we have a verse that says Jesus is the Son of God? And in some copies, it says Jesus is the Son of Man. Now, that's a very big difference, isn't it? That's a crucial difference, is it not? How can we trust what the Bible really says? How do you respond?
Look at other verses.
Look at other verses. There are literally dozens of other verses that call Jesus the Son of God. And there are dozens of other verses that call Jesus the Son of Man. So even in this less than 2% where it makes any difference to the understanding of the text, guess how many doctrines are affected by these manuscript copies? I had like 3 more pages. I don't know what happened. I deleted them. 0. Not a single doctrine is affected by this. Not a single one that matters. And the last question I was going to ask, I don't know, I seriously must have accidentally deleted a whole page. Here's the last question I was going to ask. How might the original be better protected by copies than if we actually had the originals in a vault somewhere? This is a weird one to think through.
Well, the copies might be in better shape because they're,
Okay.
you know, when they were copied from the original was in good shape, but over
Starting
time.
to fall apart. Like my Bible is starting to wear some of the pages, right? So it might be better preserved that way.
We're allowed to use the copies, whereas the originals, even if we had them, I'm sure they'd be locked up and not allowed to be touched.
Yeah, if we had the original somewhere, how accessible do you think it would be to you?
Like the Declaration.
Like the Bible in Luther's time.
Yeah, it would be buried in the bottom in levels of the Vatican somewhere, right? So there's no way you could actually see it. And then what could the Pope do? Easily.
Say whatever you want.
Yeah, oh no, this is what it says in the original. No, you can't touch it. Are you kidding me? It's sacred. But trust me, what I have is the original, and you must believe what I say. So the illustration I give in my Bible information class is if I send a note home, if Ryan does, let's say, that says we're going to have frogs on Friday, February 29th. And he makes photocopies of that and sends it to all the parents, right? January 20th. Sorry, I got a month ahead of me. January 29th is the frogs meeting. And then something comes up in Ryan's classroom and he goes, these kids are not ready for this play. This is going to be a flop. And he sends out something that says, what are you guys talking about? It was never January 29th. I said February 29th. How could he not get away with that?
The wrong one's already out there.
Yeah, well, the right one, the accurate one, has been copied so many times. He could go, no, look, here's my note that I sent home. I have the original right here, February 29th. They go, no, we all have copies of what you wrote originally, right? There should be no doubt in it. But by God allowing the originals to be lost, and maybe, who knows, one of those 5,700 is the original for all we know. There's just, we don't know. By allowing the original to be lost, but almost 5,700 copies to have been made in such a short order, it's much better preserved than someone saying, look, I have the original, and look, it says something you don't have in yours. God preserved his word remarkably well. Don't fall for the flat-out lie that we can't trust it because of how many times it's copied. All right, because it's a Bible study, I had to put in some Bible verses. Luke 5:18, I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. KJV said jot or tittle, which I thought was a weird translation as a kid. It is. It's every yod, a little tiny mark in Hebrew, every kof, every little mark. One little tiny stroke will not ever be lost until everything's accomplished. And then Luke 16:17, it's easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the least stroke of a pen to drop out of the law. Why should it be no surprise to us that the New Testament's been remarkably preserved for us?
God's protected.
Yeah, Jesus is taking care of his word, right? It is the inspired, inerrant word of God, and he's going to take care of it and preserve it. It shocked everybody when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and what we had that we can now date back to 100 AD, some think even up to 75 AD, was exactly what we had, like to 99.9% accurate to what we had recorded up to that point, copied and copied and copied. Everyone's like, whoa. Maybe this is actually, there's something to this. It's more than just Indiana Jones stuff. I mean, it's those archaeological discoveries. Dead Sea Scrolls is a fascinating subject too. Maybe we'll do some study on that sometime. When the Dead Sea Scrolls come to Anchorage, we'll do a field trip. So. All right, I'm over time. We started late, but that's all right. Let's close in prayer. Lord God, we thank you for preserving for us your word, the word that gives us hope, joy, and comfort and peace. Forgive us for our apathy and neglect towards your holy word. Help us to treasure it more dearly. Help us to study it more zealously and carefully. Help us to share it more boldly. Help us to defend it more courageously. And by your word, strengthen our faith in you and create faith in others, that your kingdom may come more and more as you rule more in our hearts and as you rule in more hearts. In the name of Jesus, the word made flesh, by his work for us, we pray, confident that you will hear and answer. Amen. Thanks for joining us tonight. Next week, do we have accurate eyewitness testimony, or did they make it up? We know it's been recorded accurately and preserved for us, but it's the original they wrote. True. Thanks for joining us online. Sorry we started a little late or ending a little late. We'll try and be closer to 7 next week. No, not next week. Sorry. Good announcement time. No Wednesday night Bible class next week.
Oh, because you're gone.
I'll be in Hood River at a missionary conference. You can't be in two places at once. So,
Surfing like this?
no. I will not be out windsurfing. In fact, I won't be in Hood River. I'll probably be on an airplane somewhere. So I couldn't even do it via the web. I'll be on my way back.
It's pretty good you brought it to me.
One of my engineers from Duluth, I had retired.